Welcome to The Explainer. Today we're unpacking one of the absolute most high-stakes geopolitical chessboards on the planet right now, and that is the Bay of Bengal. What happens in this specific body of water isn't just going to affect Asia. We're talking about massive ripple effects through global supply chains that could literally shape the next century. We're looking at a region where huge multi-billion-dollar infrastructure ambitions are crashing head-on into some incredibly complex and frankly chaotic ground realities. Okay, let's dive into this. To really grasp what's going on, we first need to anchor ourselves in the geography of the Indo-Pacific eastern flank. When you map this region out, it reveals a highly strategic theater with four major players: China, India, Bangladesh, and Myanmar. This body of water isn't just an ocean, it's a primary artery for global trade. The intense maneuvering happening here right now, that is going to shape the entire future of maritime security. So our strategic briefing today breaks down into 5 key phases. We'll kick things off with China's Malacca dilemma, map out the deepening ties between Beijing and Dhaka, confront the Rakhine roadblock, examine India's counter-strategy, and finally wrap up with the regional buffer paradox.
Phase 1. Bypassing the Malacca dilemma.
So why exactly does Beijing care so much about this specific geographic corridor? Well, it all boils down to the need for a two-ocean footprint. This is a perfect illustration of what strategists call the Malacca dilemma. Right now, a massive share of China's energy imports and general trade has to pass through the Malacca Strait, and that is a very narrow, highly vulnerable maritime choke point. To mitigate that massive risk, China desperately needs direct sea access for its landlocked southwestern Yunnan province. Mapping out an eastern corridor that bypasses that strait entirely offers a crucial overland alternative, and it grants China that true, highly coveted two-ocean footprint.
So what does this bypass actually look like in practice? It's called the China-Myanmar-Bangladesh Economic Corridor, or the CMBC. If we trace the proposed 1,700-kilometer primary artery, we see it starts up in Kunming, China, and stretches all the way down to Mandalay in Myanmar. And from there it splits. One branch heads south to Yangon, another strikes out toward the deep-sea port of Kyaukphyu in Rakhine State. And, crucially, the route also extends westward into Bangladesh, targeting the Chittagong and Mongla ports.
The strategic logic for Beijing here is just incredibly calculated. Step 1, secure a much shorter overland commercial route. Step 2, gain direct, unimpeded access to the Indian Ocean. And Step 3, and this is absolutely vital, essentially cut India entirely out of the regional connectivity equation. It's actually a revival of an older 1999 concept, but this time around, it's explicitly engineered to bypass New Delhi.
Phase 2. Beijing and Dhaka deepen ties.
Now, to build a corridor to the Bay of Bengal, China obviously needs willing partners on the coast. And a massive catalyst for this happened during the June 2026 summit in Beijing between Bangladesh Prime Minister Tariq Rahman and Chinese President Xi Jinping. Listen, this wasn't just a friendly photo op. They signed 9 bilateral agreements, officially upgrading their ties to a community with a shared future. We saw some very concrete commitments here, like plans for a brand new Chinese economic and industrial zone in Anwara. There were even reports of Bangladesh deciding to purchase J-10 fighter planes from China, which signals a very real, very tangible shift in defense and economic alignment.
Now, what's really interesting about this slide is how these bilateral ties are physically manifesting geographically, right on India's doorstep. Take the Teesta River Comprehensive Management Project, for example. It's a proposed $1 billion Chinese-backed initiative involving dredging, land reclamation, the whole infrastructure shebang. But look closely at the location. It sits a mere 20 to 22 kilometers from India's Siliguri corridor, famously known as the Chicken's Neck. For New Delhi, having a multi-year Chinese presence this close to their most critical geographic choke point represents a massive electronic intelligence vulnerability. It essentially allows Beijing to eavesdrop right on India's most important transit route.
And the pressure isn't just happening on land. There's a visual pincer movement happening at sea too. The modernization contract for Bangladesh's Mongla port was recently offered to a Chinese state corporation. As the radar mapping highlights, this puts potential maritime surveillance and threat vectors a mere 80 nautical miles from the Indian territorial border. It directly, and I mean almost exactly, mirrors the concerns India has had about Chinese naval assets on its western flank over in Gwadar, Pakistan. Phase 3. The Rakhine State roadblock. Okay, so China definitely has the capital and the diplomatic momentum. But as we know, grand strategy often collides with chaotic ground realities. And there is a stark, totally unavoidable contrast here. On one side, we have the Beijing vision, a multi-billion-dollar seamlessly integrated logistical network. But on the other side, we have the ground reality,
an active, highly volatile civil war in Myanmar that has completely paralyzed the overland corridor.
To understand just how incredibly severe this roadblock is, we have to look at Myanmar's Rakhine State, which is where that critical Kyaukphu deep-sea port is located. The rebel Arakan army now controls 14 out of 17 Rakhine townships. The fighting there is so intense that a $140 million Chinese-backed V-power plant literally had to be progressively dismantled and relocated just to escape the closing fighting perimeter. It's a harsh reality. You simply cannot build a continental railway through an active war zone that the central military junta doesn't even control.
And here's where it gets really fascinating. This instability in Myanmar hands Bangladesh a massive piece of diplomatic leverage. Right now, Bangladesh is facing the intense demographic pressure of 1.2 million Rohingya refugees who fled from Rakhine State. Because of this, Dhaka has made a hard precondition. They will not formally endorse the regional overland connectivity of the CMBC until there is absolute peace in Rakhine and safe refugee repatriation. Honestly, it's a brilliant leverage play. Bangladesh gets to reap all those bilateral Chinese investments, like the industrial zones and the port upgrades we just talked about, without officially committing to a paralyzed overland route.
Phase 4. The Necklace of Diamonds.
So, with China pushing hard from the east and Bangladesh carefully preserving its optionality, how exactly is India responding? Well, tracing this out, we see India is definitely not just sitting by and watching China build a string of pearls around it. No way. New Delhi has made a definitive, proactive doctrine shift. They are pivoting away from just reactive terrestrial border defense and leaning heavily into proactive regional maritime engagement. Two of the most foundational elements of this counter-strategy are the Sagar Doctrine and Project MASM. Sagar stands for Comprehensive Maritime Security and Economic Growth Cooperation across the whole region. Project MASM, on the other hand, strategically leverages historical trade routes and deep cultural connectivity. And importantly, India is brilliantly aligning this soft power with hard military and strategic interoperability, working right alongside the US, Japan, and Australia through the Quad. Furthermore, India's allies are actively stepping up to provide Bangladesh with viable economic alternatives. This proves Dhaka doesn't have to rely solely on China. For example, the World Bank recently approved a massive $650 million loan for the Chittagong Bay terminal. At the same time, Japan, through its JICA Development Agency, is heavily backing the Mattabari deep-sea port. These allied projects are delivering immediate, massive maritime trade capacity for Bangladesh today. That entirely neutralizes the need to wait around for a risky Chinese overland route through an active war zone.
Phase 5. The Regional Buffer Paradox.
Okay, so we've looked at China's massive ambitions, the absolute chaos unfolding in Myanmar, and India's strategic response. So the crucial point is what we call the paradox of the regional buffer. China undeniably possesses both the capital and the superpower intent to execute this grand overland strategy. But right now, Beijing's ambitions aren't primarily being halted by Indian diplomacy or even Western pressure. They are being structurally halted by the internal collapse and fragmentation of Myanmar itself. It's wild, but local instability has ironically become the ultimate buffer against superpower expansion.
Which leaves us with a final, really provocative question to ponder. The China-Myanmar-Bangladesh economic corridor is undoubtedly a potent strategic vision, but given the highly volatile realities on the ground right now, will the CMBC remain a pipe dream trapped on a burning board, or is it simply the inevitable geopolitical project of the 2040s? Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer. Keep your eyes firmly on the Bay of Bengal, because the moves made here are going to echo for decades.